Hey, good morning, Mike. Good morning, world. Good morning, Niagara. Are you still on for tomorrow, Cushman? It says Gary. Well, there you go. So there we go, everybody. So good morning, welcome to Talking Niagara. It's Thursday, April 17th. Happy Easter for everybody, because this is our last show before Easter, and we'll be back on Tuesday.
Oh, really? That's one. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the world may have changed by Tuesday 6 more times by the time Tuesday comes around.
Yeah. 6 more times.
And, 6 more. Well, every time Donald Trump changes his mind, the world changes. I think we're.
Yeah.
And I think there'd be a deal in the offing, despite all the rhetoric. I think there's a deal pending, but we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. So here leads the question. This one I'm very cautious on. One we didn't get to yesterday. Has Trump turned Canadians off populism?
Yeah. Well, first, I would just like to ask if Gary was talking to Mike there, was that something to do with the tour that they were going to have on contaminated land there for the local politicians? I'm quite interested in that.
Yeah.
If that's what they're going to do tomorrow, I'm not so sure. But whatever that happens, I'd like to know the results of that. And another big hats off to Mike and Gary for
the we are preparing, he says.
We're preparing. Well done, Mike and Gary. Way to go. That's that's very exciting what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So, yes, we just getting ready for it, Wills. Yeah, there you go.
Wow, you guys are great. Your city thanks you. We here at Talking Niagara thank you. And I'm very, very, very excited about what you guys have done here.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. All right. So here's the question. Has Trump turned Canadians off populism? I'm not a kind of fan of this particular question. I don't know that we're going through populism the way it was back in the 1920s and 30s.
Well, what's happened here is I believe that the left-wing governments, or those left of center governments, have been thought to have failed the average person, and that's what has fired up this populism that has happened all over the world. Remember, it's not just in the United States we find it. We find it in Europe. We found the hardest right party got the second most seats in the German that's the Reichstag, I guess.
Yeah.
And so this is a rise of populism everywhere, and you can hear it just about everywhere. And there's this real urge to go towards a populist type of government. Populism is becoming more and more attractive to the average person, and this, I believe, is because the governments up until now have been viewed as have failed, and they and then there's this right-wing reaction to it. But there's also populism of the left, which we keep forgetting about.
Yeah,
there are two drivers, far to the left and far to the right, of kind of populism.
Well, one of the worst aspects,
and we here that stay more in the center politically.
Yeah, one of the worst aspects of populism is a lack of political understanding, a lack of theoretical knowledge, a complete a knee-jerk reaction type thing, where nothing is being thought out. Everything basically is knee-jerk at the moment it is occurring.
Yes. So what you get hardened lines of political thought that are inflexible, and it falls on. And we found the ideals of the left were not being I would say, popular, or in the popular mind at least, not effective when you have large amounts of migration and nobody seems to know what to do with it, and there's always exceptions and all kinds of other things. And when we start to think of China versus USA, things of that kind, what gets lost here is ironically the name populism, which means the average person. It now becomes a bulk or a thing, and it's driven by idealism and not much flexibility in it. But because what's happened in the United States, this article has said that we have had a drive towards populism in Canada that has been disrupted and will not probably be successful in Canada as it has been in many of the other democratic countries.
And actually, if you look at, here's an interesting thing. If you're talking about countries that actually vote, have the same languages, neighboring countries that have the same languages, which is what we have in, with us versus the United States, Canada versus the United States. We both speak English as a majority language. And very often what one country does politically, another country does not do in those circumstances. And let me use examples. So Belgium, for example, which is not 100% French speaking, rarely follows the French lead in anything.
Well, they're half French and half German.
Yeah. Well, they rarely, even the French-speaking part of Belgium rarely follows what the French do.
Well, I'm not so sure that the French government applies to the Belgian, because they are a very unique situation. Their country split.
I get it. There's not many places where you look at the world and even back before the annexation of Austria, if you're looking at Nazi Germany, Austria spoke German, of course, but Austria was actually an SPD government back before the annexation of Germany, and a lot of the annexation of Germany, the reason why the crowd was wild about the annexation of Germany and the incoming of the Nazis is because in comparison, they saw the SPD government in the 30s as being an utter failure. It had not resolved many of the economic woes of Austria, whereas many people saw the Nazis as having resolved many of the economic woes of Germany.
Well, the Weimar Republic also had lost confidence. And we see that in the Weimar Republic, before the Nazis won out, it was the communists versus the fascists, basically. And there I got a definition just to make it clear of populism: a political approach that strives to appeal to the ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups.
Yeah. And that's
the kind of fervor that Trump has been able to take advantage of, and also other sort of political groups around the world, basically. Yeah. There's also, you might find some sort of a variation of populism going on in China when on this particular issue of the trade thing. You'll find a lot of people aligning with their government just because they have this enemy. And so populism is something that can be exploited. And right now we see what Trump is doing, and he's using sort of a variation of the Machiavellian approach that when you're dealing with people, fear is a much more effective weapon than love is, at least when you're first establishing power in a populist state. And of course, there's lots of fear and upset going on now. So The
Mike is saying here, free trade is a huge failure, and capitalism is too something to change, and will make more than will take more than a year. I actually don't believe that free trade is a failure at all. I think free trade is the way to go.
Well, we find that there's big problems with free trade, and that means there's fair trade. So the free trade is perfectly fine. And the argument with all the Western democracies with China is the fact that they don't play fair. They don't play fair at all, and they steal OP. They steal the ideas, and it's never really been it's been addressed, but not firmly enough in the WTO and other places. So the whole Western world is on board with that aspect of the free trade thing. So it has to be free trade combined with fair trade. So globalization has helped a lot of smaller and poorer countries pull themselves out of poverty, but at the same time, it has made areas of the world very reliant on specific other countries, which is not good when you think of things like defense and independence.
Yeah.
You have, for instance, we have extreme reliance on China for rare earth metals, and yet they haven't been developed here in Canada, and we've got lots of them. And so we just let them do it because they did it cheaper, and now we're completely reliant on them. And things so that's the problem with globalization and free trade. The other part, of course, is it a fair trade? If globalization and free trade were fair, it would be all right. Now we think of NAFTA and Trump, and even our own politicians talk about all our industries that moved to China, and we keep telling everybody that was because big industrialists moved their stuff to China because they could get them cheaper. So they took our jobs away and put them there. But the early days of the first NAFTA agreement, our companies were going into the States. Our unions were against free trade because our factories and stuff were being pulled up and sent to the States, particularly into the southern states where they didn't have unions. And they got cheaper labor there in the United States than here, and they had better tax breaks for people there. But what happened eventually is when our industries moved, many of them moved into the States. Thereafter, many of the ones that moved into the States then moved into China.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things it was saying here is amongst younger Canadians, only a small number believe that things will be better for their generation. We recorded the lowest ever satisfaction with direction of the country, the lowest ever sense of attachment to Canada, the worst ever economic outlook, the highest ever perception that the world is more dangerous than ever, and the highest ever opposition to immigration amongst the young.
Well, of course, they're the ones that are going to lose their jobs to new immigrants, aren't they? Of course, they're the ones that have to try to get a job or try to get a house when housing becomes inflated because there's too many people and not enough houses. And of course, they're going to resist immigration. Now, I don't think most people really resist immigration the same way as it appears in that article. They resist immigration.
Yeah, obviously, I'm just reading the mere words, right?
Yeah. They resist the amount of immigration. Everybody knows that we need immigrants. Absolutely. Everybody knows like Elon Musk was an immigrant to Canada, and then he went into the United States and he made a fortune. Unfortunately, he got himself involved in politics and whatever. But there's an example there. And we found that we can when you talk to experts, science experts or whatever, you find that quite often they're from immigrant families, and that's because we invite them here, and Canada especially tries to target the best of the best normally, except for the refugee part of it. But the immigration part of it is trying to focus in on those people that have the wherewithal to fit into the country economically. So Yeah, so you can understand that. You can understand the resistance to immigration, but as yet, it's not a racist thing. That would be a problem, you know.
Yeah.
But
Well, actually, and the whole point is, of course, we only need to wind the clock back, I think, to the last election where PPC were talking about the need to stop mass immigration. Right.
yeah,
And again, again, there was accusations right there of that being a racist thing. But the trouble is nobody was actually listening to what they were saying.
yes, unfortunately, they use the term mass immigration, which is a term of the far right and a term used by racist type of bodies that talk about mass resignation or mass immigration. What they should have done is retermed it, because mass immigration has a negative connotation that is used by racist groups. So they should have said too much immigration, or unfettered immigration, or you know, unrealistic immigration,
Well,
something
the
like
interesting, you see, the interesting thing is that and this isn't just here. The same criticism I had back in the UK. I remember a time when you were going through economic bad terms, and you'd hear these stories about, oh, immigrants are coming in and getting nice jobs in the country. What, almost kind of, why can't you, kind of thing. And I'm thinking to myself, well, actually, when the country is going through a real bad time, when there's an economic downturn, when inflation's going up, this is precisely the time when you should be turning off the immigration tap. You should be basically making sure that your own people are employed before we can start bringing in immigrants again.
Well, sure. And there's things that are very irksome that will cause resentment towards immigration, because the government had a policy of making sure that the immigrants got good jobs. So that's why you can't phone any government agency now without getting a thick accent on the other side, because their policy was to integrate new immigrants by giving them jobs in the government, based on, not so much based on merit, but based on the fact that they had to diversify and try to help the immigrant community come into the country. But I mean, I remember talking to a guy at the Pogie office years ago, and he was I think he was from South Asia, I think he was South Asian, but I believe he was. Now, the guy wore $1 million suit, and he looked real good, and he didn't understand his job one bit. And when he says, well, where do you think you're going to get a job? And I says, I'd like your job, right? I know more about what this is all about than you do. And of course, it didn't do me much good.
Well, actually, the one time
I told him I'd been on Pogie on and off for a long time. I was completely experienced, and he didn't seem to know what he was doing. So I says, I should get your job.
And the average person would have kind of just laughed at that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, he didn't know quite what to make of it, and he just kept making mistakes on my claim over and over. So,
well,
because he just misunderstood anything, he had no idea what he was doing.
I only one time went to an unemployment office when I got let go from one particular job, and I went to the unemployment office there, and so they set you up. This is in England. They set you up for an interview. So 10 days later, after you've signed on, you come in for this interview, and part of that interview is show us everything you've got. Make sure you've got printouts for everything. And it's like, so I came into that interview and I said, I can't give you printouts for everything because I never print anything off. There's no such printer. I don't use printers. I'm not wasting my paper on you. And he was like, okay. And then I told him,
that's a good way of making friends, Peter. right off the
So
bat.
I told him exactly what I was doing, what I would have been doing. I gave him the basic paperwork, the minimum we needed, but everything else, I told him exactly what I was doing to find work, and he's going, okay, you know, clearly the type of job you're looking for won't be found in this office. And I said, precisely. You know, because they had listings of the jobs in the employment office, right? And there's not a job of my type ever found there, right?
No, yeah. So, yeah, basically, and Poggy was a joke too. I remember going there and we're getting these lectures on how to get jobs by a 23-year-old young woman graduate from the local college, right? And she had these ideas like, this is what you got to do, and we're all telling her it's a recession, you know. Now, if you make a proper resume to wow them, that's the way to do it. And we're all kind of rolling our eyes. Oh yeah, well, you know, there is no work, and we've all gone to the places where we normally work, and there's no work, you know.
Yeah.
But if you make a really good resume, no, that could make no difference.
Well, in fact, on a job like yours, probably not a great deal of difference. You know, most likely they're going, you know, when they're looking at the jobs, they're going to go, oh, I've got John Smith here. Oh, I've got Dave Wheeler here. Oh, I've got, you know, Abdul Khan here. You know, I know all of these guys. I know exactly what they can do. Right.
Well,
but
yeah.
I
For
can't
instance, if you're a machinist, like there was a guy there. I remember one of those meetings. There was a guy there. At that time he was 55 years old, who I thought was ancient at the time, but he and he was of German background, and he said that's not going to work. He says, how I get a job is I'm a machinist. I've been a machinist for 30 years. I go into the shop and I say, look, I need work. I says, you have a position. And then they send the foreman out to talk to me, because the foreman knows what questions to ask. Do you know how to do this on a lathe or that on the milling machine, and this and that, and where have you worked and what did you do on those jobs? So they get to somebody who knows. They go to the foreman and say, look, you need a machinist? Well, we got one here. You want to ask him the questions you need to know, and the foreman would sort it out, you know, and the pencil pushers will just finish it off. But I don't know, it got complicated. But anyway, populism,
actually, that's the right way to do. That's the right way to deal with a job search in that scenario.
Yeah. So populism is rising, but it says in this article that it's not going to work in Canada, at least not in the short term, because of what's happened in the United States. The foofara in the United States and the extreme division between people in the United States has turned off outside observers. It hasn't taken foot here in Canada. The populism, obviously, Pierre Poilievre has tried a version of populism to ignite people against the government with things like the carbon tax and things of that kind. And that has kind of united people. And he has pointed out that the elitists in government were out of touch with the actual people. But we got a big warning sign, because what's happened now in the States with the extreme division in their population, we don't want that. We don't want good guy, bad guy politics that is happening down in the States. Yeah, and I will remind you too, again, about Doug Ford when he won. Regardless of what you think of Doug Ford, he did not deride his opponents. Yeah. He pointed out during the time of the elections his policies versus their policy, maybe even this person is not good for that job or whatever. But when the election was over, he congratulated every candidate from every party for stepping up. He did not point the good guy, bad guy thing.
And one of the things I would say that Poilievre's failed in is he's failed to pivot. He's not changing direction fast enough.
We got another article about that a little later on.
Yeah, he's basically he's stuck on an old record and can't move on to the new record.
Well, that was the case, but it's changed. But it takes time to change the message, and the conservatives seem to be getting uh, some push from the public now, because once people begin to remember what the elitists were like in liberal Ottawa for the last decade, they still have much resistance. Poilievre now has to come back into the mainstream and look as if he is not somebody who derides people. His big problem was he could get away with chewing up Trudeau, but it was not. We didn't like the way he did it. Well, the Canadians don't like the way they did it, the harsh way in which he did it, and the personality assassinations that he was using. Rather than assassinating the politics, he went after personalities, which Canadians will tolerate just for so long.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so moving on. Thundering Waters, the developers are looking to make it less contentious. And then guess what popped up in my list of comments? Thundering Waters, we have had several meetings with developers in the city, and it appears they're going to save an important forest for our recommendations to make the city to make it a city park type of thing.
And good show, man. Good show.
Have a great long weekend.
What was the inspiration behind that when I was reading it in the city agenda? So good show, man.
Yeah. So, okay. So the Thundering Waters, making it less contentious. Tell us about it.
Well, they, of course, that contentious area, there's a development being proposed that would put houses and a number of houses and things like that. I don't have the article right up in front of me, but it takes, according to the plans, it takes great efforts into preserving those essential environmental aspects of the area. So there are parks and open grounds and protections of the waterways to protect the particular type of animals that are there, like little salamanders and things like that. And as soon as I find the article, I'll bring it up.
And my understanding is Centennial Homes is now the owner of this development, and where the 626 dwelling units, including street townhouses, stacked townhouses, and other developments.
So it has areas for environmental protection and stormwater management facilities, about 26.3 hectares in total. The lands are on the north side. Well, we know where it is. Now it's provincially significant wetlands, and phase one of the development are to the east, and the council approved more than 200 dwellings. So there are a large part of the forest, including an old growth area where the giant oak is located. The giant oak in there is going to be transferred to the current owner, Centennial Homes. And Centennial Homes has come up with a plan that protects as much of the wetlands as are essential. Now, if it was to me, and when I spoke about this with Paul during the meeting about the agenda, I just said I wish they would just leave the whole thing alone. But having said that, when I looked over the plans, and now the plans are about two weeks gone in my head, but they did seem to have if you're going to have a development in environmentally sensitive areas, this is the type you want. At least on paper, it looks like the better option, other than just leave it alone.
Yeah. I know that Paul Lemire famously said, "Let's get this started," and and it kind of never did it?
No, it didn't. It got certain city council members a trip or two to China.
Yeah, but that was a long time ago and a different developer.
Yeah. So it has a rich ecosystem in this area, and guys like Mike and Gary are very keen on looking at
The interesting thing, when I was doing some further research on this, there's an old article from 2017 that popped up in this. It said the developer hopes to clear the misunderstanding of thundering waters. Right. So this is a 2017 article. So the developers have been trying to clear up this misunderstanding for a long time.
Yeah, so here's a quote here. It says the market has changed, like the cost of houses and all of that stuff, and the push for greater intensification. In this case, Centennial just preferred to go a different way. It's just residential in the different form. Now, of course, it's a subdivision, and I don't feel that you're going to likely get a whole lot of affordable homes in it. That's one aspect of it, but it does make great efforts, so it seems, in its plans.
Well, why not? Because stacked townhouses, for example, are a classic affordable home type of concept.
It was never mentioned in the agenda.
Yeah,
they may have subsequently pointed that out.
Because in many parts of the world, this concept of stacked townhouses is very often used for the most affordable homes, the most cost-effective homes.
I doubt it. Now, phase two, we just talked about phase one, but phase two will consolidate parkland blocks to create one larger and centralized neighborhood park, says senior planner Mackenzie CC. It will also result in efficient use of the land and the provision of affordable housing options. You have to have environmentalists crawling all over that, I would say, to make sure that it's done right, so that the animals that are there and the old growth forest and all that is well protected, and it won't be disrupted at least as much, at the least amount, by construction and other things. So planning staff said that the conveyance of these lands is in the public interest and will ensure long-term protection and conservation of adjacent natural heritage features. That's the important part.
Yeah. Time for Mike to be wearing a nice suit with a nice orange jacket on it and a white hard hat,
flanked by a guy called in a green suit that looks like a professional wrestler. That would be Gary.
But in a nice, well done up suit with a nice tie and everything like that.
Yeah,
and both of them have got to have
green tie. I just don't see it fitting him.
And both of them have got to have hard hats, white hard hats.
Yeah,
white because that's the office color, right? You've got to be taken seriously, so you've got to be dressed in the office color, not the not the workers' color.
I could just see Gary showing up with his white shirt and tie and a briefcase full of beer.
Okay, so we've got a couple of comments. So Randy, Thundering Waters is reducing a large proportion of what was proposed because the market in condos is beginning to crash and housing is unsellable. Yep. And in this area for wages, Thundering Waters will redesign tenant the TT leave the ability to infill later. Yeah. Okay. So Karen, I drove through the section that was being developed. The infrastructure of the 200 homes is all in. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. That was the same company who built the 4th Avenue site. So I say don't trust them. Okay. And environmentalists have been spanked back time and time again with the mayoral superpowers and future provincially driven squashing the environmental controls, rezoning for affordable housing. The trees don't stand a chance.
Sad.
And
sad,
can't
stop the development of the area. However, like I would say, just leave it alone. Just leave it alone.
Yeah.
But it's private land, and the developers have certain rights. But the only thing we can do is put controls on them and make sure that the environmental aspects of the area are preserved as best as possible.
Yeah.
And Randy was so right about the market changing and condos and so on. So
yeah. Okay. Honda made an announcement that it's not moving to the US.
yes, but I don't trust that announcement so much. What's happened is Honda has already said it's going to move or build a plant that it had it planned on building in Mexico and build it in the States. And they're also talking about production, another plant production, and that looked as if it was a lot of the stuff from Alliston, Ontario, was or in the region of Newcomsey there, to move into the States. What I see here is they don't plan to make the expansions of the Honda plant in Ontario as they did. I have a feeling that they were going to ramp up production in Ontario to supply the North American market, but instead are going to move that that investment into the United States. I don't think they ever had any intention of closing down the plant in Ontario. They built the very popular Honda Civic there. Anyone who's driven a Honda Civic will know why it's popular. It's just a really, really good, reliable car. That's a very popular car in Canada, and obviously it would be in the States as well. But because of what's happening in the United States and their sort of protectionist ideas, I think any investment that was slated for Ontario will now be going into the United States. I don't think the plants and the factories themselves will be picked up and moved there. Not, and I think that was a bit of a fear thing. But I think what really is underlying here, they didn't plan to move those factories into the United States, but I have a feeling that what's really at issue here is any expansion of the Honda facilities in Ontario will now be slated for the U.S.
Probably. Yeah, I think you're probably right. So they may not move, but they may, future development may all occur in the US.
Yeah. Now, this is unfortunate. I hope they resolve this. One of the aspects of the Trump tariff thing is he's attacking Canada rather than facilitating Canada. What he should be doing is understanding the North American market as one big free zone, which would add a huge amount of power, economic power to the whole world. And instead, he's decided to put tariffs on to force production into the United States, which then weakens Canada, which is not good in the long run for the United States. You want a very strong economic neighbor dependent on the United States, but back and forth, so that you could show the world you have this huge economic powerhouse, as Ford would say. He wants North America, like this powerhouse of Canada and the United States. He's got a better vision than Trump has at this particular time. But we still don't know why Trump is doing what he's doing. So that might change.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and the car tariff situation seems to be changing day to day.
Betty Zoom says, sorry, was away. Have a great weekend, Mike. That's from message to Mike from Betty Zoom.
Yeah. So no, I'm not blaming Trump's slick. Just everyone seems to be blaming him for everything today.
Well, he's the guy that's causing the chaos, and we don't really know what his ultimate plans are. So it's hard to be a politician in Canada right now without focusing on what's happening there and the existential threat. So,
well, I think everybody is, and even
Trump does what he does best, stays in the headlines.
Yeah. And okay, so then the next article is further proof of this, because university teachers have been warned against traveling to the United States, particularly those in research sectors, especially where American research has been curtailed. So where they, where they could be seen as kind of as being opposed to the Trump regime. I'm not saying that they are, but they could be seen as. And that's why they're giving the warning. The Canadian Association of University Teachers is giving this warning.
There seems to be this sort of suspicion of academics. And of course, a lot of the funding and research money is being dried up in the United States. And the research in Canada and the United States is often very, very closely tied. We only have to look to the Great Lakes. We get money from the United States to do certain aspects of the research here, and we, of course, we then support the research on the other side because it's a combined effort.
Yeah,
those things are becoming kind of suspect in the United States right now, and they seem to be. The administration seems to be kind of wiping the slate clean of all academic research so that they can rebuild it back up again, ostensibly to get rid of the waste. But in the meantime, if an academic is going down there and there is some suspicion about what they're doing or how they're doing it, I really can't understand why they have to be worried about going down there. But they're talking about people who are being born in outside of Canada and going down there for research. They may get a little bit of a hassle. Randy in Chippewa says, in Canada, the Liberals have demanded a move to electric that is not sustainable in the Canadian climate, just for starters. So I imagine electric cars, electric heaters, so on, I guess. That is enough to curb expansion in gasoline for the moment. Now you add in Trump's demands, and auto manufacturers don't stand a chance in any predictions. We are looking at a slow return to local manufacturing in order for auto companies to comply with the individual markets. Yeah, you might have a point there that when automobiles first came out, there was hundreds of automobile companies, and they were for localized markets.
yeah.
You had one in New Jersey for New Jersey. You had one in Hoboken.
And most of those names have been forgotten, haven't they? The only names that you remember are the big ones.
Yeah, I remember I remember I knew a guy who had a 1922 Cardway, and until I saw the car, I'd never even known there was a manufacturer.
A what?
Yeah.
And it's like in Britain, there used to be famously there used to be a Bristol car, and it's like I went a Bristol and never heard of it, right? And so this is even in the 60s. I'd never heard of a Bristol back in the 60s, and yet it was like in the 40s and 50s. There were all these individual car manufacturers, small little ones that maybe that were into a couple of dozen cars a day. That was it. That was their production.
Well, the Pierce Arrow, I think, was built in Buffalo. The famous Pierce Arrow was built in Buffalo. So but what Randy's saying, he's saying that manufacturing might become more localized and for a tighter, more regional market because of what's happening.
I think it will still be run by the giants like GM and GM and Honda and the like.
It seems rather funny because the GM and Honda and all those have sort of adapted to the USMCA trade agreement, and now they're asked not to do that anymore. I think they've all got a reprieve for a few months while they're supposed to gear up to buying and making parts in the United States. I think that's a bad idea. I think probably making all those parts that come offshore are made in North America is a better idea. It gives you much more flexibility.
Yeah.
The Mexicans, the Americans, the Canadians could facilitate each other very easily, and there is
Yeah.
no
And
there is
yeah,
no reason to believe that our defense and defense will be our security will be offset, because it's if if we're making nickel for the United States, they take half of our nickel. If we say, oh, we're not going to give you a nickel now, they just walk up and get it. So it's always there's no security issues with the North American market.
yeah.
The
Right. Okay. So, we were talking about these university teachers, and one of the things they've been talking about is don't go down there if you're transgender. Well, I would be saying that that applies not just to university teachers, but anybody.
yeah,
Gay, transgender might well be in danger.
that's kind of sad. Um, I I would put that to a test, because I don't really think they could care less if you're a transgender person. But if you're a transgender in academia, and part of your academics have to do with DEI, then you may be a person of suspect. But if they're withdrawing the funding from those particular academics, then I can't really understand it. They're looking for things more like, if you're a if you're sort of support things like Hamas and stuff, so they might take your phone and look through it and decide that you're they might I don't know, decide, okay, well, you are you are sympathetic to the Palestinians, so you are a Islamic sympathizer, so get out of here. That kind of thing, that might happen. But I think it's an overstated thing at this time, although they're the ones that are looking at it closely. I really don't see the United States being that um, resistant to anybody that moves across the border if they got a ticket to come back into Canada. But they're
Yeah.
warning people that were born outside of Canada and are Canadian citizens traveling there. I would imagine if you're a Palestinian Canadian, or a Lebanese Canadian, or a Syrian Canadian, they might take a closer look at you.
Yeah, and particularly, and yeah, that's true whether you're transgender or straight.
Yeah, I don't think the transgender stuff is as important to them as where you might be from, and what might be your political affiliations
Yeah.
with uh, Islamic movements or something like that. So if your name is Muhammad, you're going to have a good. They're going to look you over.
Oh, more than likely, yeah, exactly, because particularly Islamic names will be top of a gender, I think.
Yeah, and they're really dumb with that too. After 9/11, I have my mom's got a cousin, her who is Finnish by background, and her last name is Ryala, but because it had Allah in it, they pulled her aside around the 9/11 times.
Okay.
They said, "What is this? What does it mean? You got Allah in your name?" No, it's Ryala. It's not Allah. It's Ryala. The Allah part is just part of the name, Ryala, but it's got Allah in it. Are you as Islamic? So
Well, the
here's this blonde, blue-eyed Canadian person of Finnish background being accused of being an Islamic, or
yeah,
being
yeah,
questioned as if they were Islamic, just because part of
and
the said Allah in it.
but again, that's a mistaken thing because it's at the wrong end of the name. Because, for example, many of the Arabic names have al something at the beginning. Al, the al, that kind of pronunciation is at the beginning. Al
Well, the
Mahmoudi.
whole point was it
Yeah.
was complete ignorance.
Yes,
on the
exactly.
part. They don't know what they're looking for, basically.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Anything else? Okay. We haven't we hit that point where Canadian no longer matters at the border?
Well, I don't think the issue of Canadian is an issue with the Americans. Canadians staying longer than 30 days that's not an affront to us. That is a protection for the United States to make sure that someone coming from Canada
I'm
doesn't
surprised that
stay
hasn't.
in the United States.
I'm surprised that hasn't been
We
in
have
place
people
already.
all over the world come and get a Canadian citizenship and then go in there and sneak into the United States and stay there. So that's a protection. I've known guys that done that. They gone down there and worked illegally. I've known
Well,
people who've done
I'll
that.
be I'll be blunt. Why hasn't that happened already? I'd have expected that to have been in place a long time ago. You know, people like well, my neighbors used to have a place in Florida they used to go to regularly.
Well,
They used to
that's the
stay down
person
there
they're not
6
worried about. They're not worried about those people. And for the largest, for most of the of all time up until now, is Canadians went there and they came back. So you had a few of them going down there and working illegally sometimes, but it was a minor thing. But
Yeah,
because Canada is full of a lot of people from all over the world now, they're worried about people going into the United States and staying there, right? Just because they have Canadian citizenships, and the border really didn't worry about Canadians previous to this. Now they are worried about Canadians going down there and staying down there and
yeah.
working and so on. So the whole idea of having a 30-day eyeball on you is just the realities of what the Canadian population has become. It's become a lot of new Canadians down there, and we know that a lot of new Canadians want to go into the United States. And we see it on the border all the time, where they're sneaking across, and that's was part of the issue of the border problems we've had with the United States. So I think that really doesn't. It's an impediment to us visiting the United States right now. But for now, I'm not really too concerned about it. Um, I know it's not as easy as it used to be. You used to just be able to
Yeah.
walk across or drive across, and they'd hardly even look at you. I remember coming back from Libya in the 80s, and I had my passport in my pocket. I drove over there for some reason into the States, and the border guard the customs guy asked me for ID, and I gave him my passport. He didn't know what to do with it. He looked at it this way, looked at it that way, and he says, "Can you give me a driver's license instead?" I said, "Well, that's a passport, man. It's that."
Well, the interesting thing is, had he opened the pages and started leafing through and found the Libyan visa, it might have gone ding 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 ding. What's going on here, Dave? Yeah, so many states visit here, use our medical, and that's the plate where the plates are noticed. Dave, it looks like we've got a problem with Dave at the moment. Okay, so moving on. MPP Wayne Gates is seeking an expansion of the provincial staycation credit. He's saying, given uncertain economic climate that created by the Trump administration, as a common sense to make sure working families still enjoy a night out or a summer trip, and invest in Ontario business, Ontario jobs, and the local Ontario economy.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. You're talking about the tax break.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good idea,
Vacation.
particularly at this particular time. And also remember, a trip to the United States, even if you want it, might be unrealistic for the average person. And the average person may want to have a vacation, and this will stimulate that.
Yeah, and exactly. If you've got a particular budget that heading to the US, that you've got to pay nearly twice as much to get. Your Canadian dollar doesn't stretch as far anymore.
No, and that I think is as much of an issue as the politics is. The insecurity of the average person right now Do they want to spend that kind of money they had planned to spend? Go to the Grand Canyon or something like that, which is awesome. I've been there. They might want to go see the Grand Canyon, but might think, oh well, with these uncertain times right now, I still want to get away, but that might be too much on the budget.
And exactly. So Gates is basically saying, look, remember, with places like Niagara alone, the tourism responsible for 40,000 jobs, 2,800 businesses, and let's ensure we invest to protect those jobs and small businesses in Ontario. And he's looking for a program that would ensure workers and families have supports for time in this time of uncertainty, while also making sure that vital sectors in Ontario are supported.
Yeah, it's a very good idea. He brought it up before. A variation of it got passed, and so hats off to Wayne for bringing that back up again.
I don't see, I see it as a continuing, it's at the moment, yes, while our economy is not doing particularly brilliant, it is not a bad idea. It's, something we can support.
Yeah, it stimulates Ontario too, or Canada in general, to have that kind of thing. So I think it's a good idea that he's brought this back out on the table during these uncertain economic times. When this all blows over, we can do what we want again. But in the meantime, families who are very suspicious about what, or very unsure about what's happening, they can at least get a vacation in Ontario.
Yeah.
And know that it's going to cost them a little bit less.
Yeah. And again, for anybody, obviously we're in the Niagara region, we support people coming to Niagara, but we also think that, hey, Niagarans have got to get away as well. So, hey, there's plenty of places we can go in other parts of Ontario.
Yeah, well, I'm packing things up, and I'll be staying in Queenston this summer, and yeah, so definitely there are a lot of hidden gems in and around Ontario where you can go for a vacation. Just especially if you've got a family or something like that. Just look over things, and hopefully you can get a tax credit to go on a vacation. And
Randy raises a good point. Remember, gas prices are plunging right now, and we're at the Easter weekend. Buy early, get as much gas as you can in your car. Right?
Yeah, gas up soon. Good point.
Gas price will go up after during the weekend.
Yeah, definitely, and do that, because siphoning off gas nowadays is harder and harder. So you don't want that option either, because gas caps nowadays are harder to get at, and so to siphon off gas from your neighbor is just not an option these days. So yeah, get your gas.
Yeah. All right. So my kids say gas price not so bad. Well, gas prices are not so bad, but remember, we're at Easter weekend, and traditionally the gas price has gone up at Easter weekend.
Yeah, because the scurvy dogs are going to make us pay. They're going to max out the profits because you don't have a choice.
And at the end of the day, when you've gone away for the weekend and now you're driving back home from wherever you are on the Sunday or the Monday, hey, we're going to hike the gas for you because we can.
Capitalist swine.
Because you've been away. So therefore, we're going to put the price up. Yeah. It is what traditionally happens, of course, at this time of year.
Yeah, particularly in a tourist town.
Yeah. And that's kind of where we are. And hey, even with Gates's staycation concept, that's going to be true. That's going to be true wherever you're going.
Well, yeah, but I think his plan is like more for everything. Plus, summertime gas costs more for some reason. I don't know why, but we see. The Saudis are pumping oil out like crazy right now, so the fuel price may stay low for a while. They have issues with other oil producers, and they're going to make them suffer because they've been overproducing and lying about it. So now the Saudis have said, well, we're going to do that and we'll see what you think about it. So they're going to push the oil price down. We'll see how that works.
Yeah. In fact, actually, that's interesting. They tend to more, when it comes to the price of gas, they tend to pay more attention to the Saudis than they do the rest of OPEC.
Because the amount that Saudi supplies.
Can supply. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, they can. All right. I think we can kind of leave it at that point. The one thing we missed out upon, though, is Niagara Falls City Council wants to amend the rules because they want to encourage developments to have a sunset clause requiring the project to start within a particular period of time.
Yeah, that's a big issue where a developer gets a piece of property, changes its designation from residential to commercial or whatever, and then that's all they really want to do, because once they change the designation, their property value goes up and they can borrow money off the property, which is a trick they use, which Jim Diodati didn't like too much, and that's why the sunset clause is there. You want to develop something, we'll give you the paperwork to do it, but you got to do it within 3 years. We want to shovel in the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to get shovels in the ground, because it's no use like that development on Ferry and Stanley, where there's a great big hole in the ground. Nah, we got to end that kind of stuff. We've got to stop that. Right. All right. And we're kind of, Dave, I think you've gone again. Dave? All right. I'm going to end it at that point, because we've lost Dave. It's not any point in him coming back onto the show. Just see whether he can rejoin at this point. No, I'm assuming he can't. So, hey, have a great weekend. I'm not going to end it the way that Dave normally does, but I'm looking for peace as well. I do look for peace as well. Oh, here he is. Dave? Dave. Oh, is this a new one? No.
There I am.
There you are.
I just came back to wish everybody a happy Easter.
Yeah.
And have a great long weekend, everyone. But in the meantime, don't forget Gaza. I say that all the time. Ukraine as well, but particularly Gaza, because so many evil things are happening there. And this is a time when we think of Gaza as close by to the Holy Land, where Easter is a big deal, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, so don't forget Gaza. But in the meantime, have a great Easter. And
yeah, absolutely. Great Easter. And